candidate. She is currently a grant program manager at Office of Civic and Community Engagement at the University of Miami. And before her time at UF, she earned a master's degree in Family, Youth, and Community Sciences from UF, and then also a bachelor or a BA degree in Visual and Media Arts from Emerson College. So with that, in for a great presentation today on looking at the human and environmental sides of building up a climate resilient agricultural industry in the Southeast.
Thank you so much, Sam. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see this? Yes, cool. All right, hello, and thanks for listening to this presentation, Advancing Climate Risk Mitigation of Crop Production in the Southern U.S. It's a working title. And like Sam said, my name is Megan, and I'm a PhD candidate in interdisciplinary ecology at the University of Florida. So I just wanted to introduce a quick timeline. I'm going to be talking a lot about high tunnels today, and I'll tell you more about what those are and why people use them. But basically, they are passively ventilated structures where you can raise crops, direct in soil, in containers. People use them for seed production. They have all sorts of uses. And basically, the first high tunnels were seen in Europe in the 19th century. The first one in the US was built in 1953 in Kentucky. And then in 2009, the National Resources Conservation Service launched a grant program where they subsidize most of the cost of a high tunnel for farmers with some caveats. But that's basically what I'm trying to show here is that, you know, there's this really big time lag sort of between when we got hip to these in the US and then really when, you know, there was government intervention in terms of incentivizing the use of high tunnels. And so here is a table that I adapted from a publication out of the University of Kentucky. They conducted a survey, and then this here is showing the increase in the number of high tunnels in a pile of southern states from 2010 and then through 2020. So as you can see, there's been a massive increase in the number of high tunnels that have been installed in this 10-year period in this region. So basically, the whole purpose of this study is to get a better understanding of what's going on in this region to move towards climate efficiency for crop production growers. So for the purposes of my dissertation, I'm going to dive deeply into these passive cooling structures, which I'll call high tunnels, and water resource management specifically. So also, the point of this was to identify research priorities from the perspective of growers in this region. And the idea is that the priorities identified can be used to develop new research initiatives and support current research and extension programs. So this area here in red is known as the USDA-defined southern region. It includes 13 contiguous states and the 2 territories, Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. So this was the geographic focus for the water resource management portion of my study. And then for the high tunnel work, I focused on Georgia and Florida specifically. So for my data sources, I used existing data available from the NRCS High Tunnel Program, also the Census of Agriculture. I also collected data from a series of focus group type facilitated discussions and from a water resource management assessment questionnaire developed and distributed. And I worked very closely with Dr. Mickey Swisher and Family, Youth, and Community Sciences in all of that work. So this here is a photo of one of the outreach activities that I helped with This is in the high tunnel located at the Plant Science Research and Education Unit in Citro, Florida, where all of the agricultural experiments for the high tunnel project were conducted. So as you can see here, these are a couple of farmers. They're going through the plots and they are assessing here what is pak choi in the high tunnel. So for this, most of this direct engagement work that was done was with small acreage farmers. They were either certified organic or using organic practices, but not necessarily certified. And I used a mixed method approach. There's various descriptive reporting and thematic analysis of the qualitative data. And then other collaborators on this project include folks from UGA, FAMU, other people around the University of Florida and the USDA, and Dr. Jin Zhao from Horticultural Sciences Department, and her student Shufeng Tian was responsible for basically all of the biological experiments that were executed in the high tunnel. So I've been talking about high tunnels. You might be like, what are high tunnels? So high tunnels, they also are called polytunnels, hoop houses, low tunnels. They have a bunch of names, but basically they're protected structures used for crop production in agriculture. Basically, the main reason people are using protected structures as part of their farming operations is to extend the season. Extending the growing season allows growers to enter markets with their crops earlier and stay in them later. This is basically a way of controlling a lot of the uncertainties, being the main ones being climate and market. So high tunnels are a passive means of controlled production because the ventilation and temperature control are naturally achieved by opening and closing the side walls. In contrast, greenhouses, they're usually made of glass and are considered active structures because they usually have some kind of electrically powered ventilation, heating or cooling systems. So these are just a few different kinds. On the bottom left here, these are known as caterpillar tunnels. You can probably see why they kind of look like caterpillars. These ones you manually roll up the sides and then sort of clip them up to get ventilation. The structure up here, this is known as a multi-bay. So as you can see, there's sort of 3 high tunnels all right next to each other. This is actually the high tunnel that was in the previous photo. This is the one at the Plant Science Research and Education Unit. And then over here, these are called Gothic style tunnels. And this roof shape is designed to withstand large snow loads. So this is really for folks in the Northeast trying to extend the season through the winter. So there's a lot of resources out there for growers interested in using high tunnels. These books are the ones that I've looked at the most. This Mefford one on the left is sort of considered the gold standard. That author lives in Maine, where historically farmers have been using high tunnels for a lot longer than they have been in the South. So there's a lot of great information out there about the best practices for extending the season throughout the winter. So in the South, we don't have to worry about the winter as much. And with that, there's a lot more investigation that's needed to establish what those best practices are. There's also a lot of other great resources out there, like EDIS publications, extension publications from other universities, lots of USDA reports as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the NRCS grant program. So this is a subsidy for the purchase of a high tunnel. It's meant to cover about 75% of the cost. And really the high tunnel use has gained a lot of popularity nationwide as a result of this initiative. So there's a few funding programs. The main one is this first one known as EQUIP. And so these are the different funding mechanisms that farmers can apply to get this high tunnel subsidy. Also, if farmers are considered underserved, then they get a little bit more money. There are some rules, however, to follow when you accept this money and you install high tunnel using this money. So you have to maintain the structure for at least 4 years. You must purchase a pre-manufactured kit with the funding, so you can't just kind of build one on your own. You have to plant directly in the soil. Now, this is a big one because there's a lot of research out there, and a lot of really like a lot of investigation into hydroponic growing, movable tunnels, things that aren't a part of this NRCS grant program, but are still really great ways of, options for growers to use in terms of operating high tunnels on their operations. Also, the structure needs to be at least 6 feet in height. I'm not really sure why that is. I'm going to go ahead and assume so you can get a tractor in there when you're, ready to till in a cover crop, for example. So this is a visualization from the Web of Science showing the number of publications in the purple bars, and the citations is that blue line. So this is all the literature published in the US since the inception of the NRCS program. And by all the literature, I mean the peer-reviewed literature. So this doesn't include those USDA reports and extension publications I mentioned earlier, but there are many. So I just grabbed this month, so that's why you see this sort of dip down for 2023, because it's only February. But as you can see, over time, there's been a lot of published peer-reviewed literature about high tunnels. And so this includes experiments in high tunnels. There's a lot of experiments comparing open field production to high tunnel production. There's a lot out there in terms of pest and disease management specifically. So a lot of what you see out there, though, are your typical agricultural experiments. So this is a visualization from a program called SiteSpace, which allows you to do scientometric analysis of literature. And basically, that is different from, say, a literature review, where you're kind of looking through the content and establishing themes and characteristics from the content itself. This is actually looking at the characteristics of the literature data set. So basically, how what are the journals that these are coming out of? Who are the authors that are publishing? What universities are they coming out of? And what are they, what are the papers about? So this is a visualization basically showing the journals that the articles were published in the middle here, and then clustered by the subject matter of the article. So as you can see here, there's some crop specific stuff, right? We have tomatoes, we have some leafy greens as well. Got lettuce here, spinach here. This is, referring to pest pressure. So just so you can get a sense of kind of where the literature is at. So this is an aerial photo of a farm in Georgia called Crystal Organic Farm. It's managed by a guy named Nicholas Donk, and there's a podcast called Small Farm Smart Daily. In episode 199, Nicholas is interviewed at length and shares a lot of really incredible detail about his experimentation with high tunnels over time, how he started really small with just 1 or 2 and expanded the number of high tunnels on his operation. He currently has 28. So really, the point of this is that, right, these are gaining popularity farmers are seeing, the increase in their bottom line, so they're continuing to adopt these. Nicholas shares a lot of great insights about, how they're just really so customizable. You can get different sizes and shapes to suit your needs. Some features can be automated. The one at the research station in Citra has sidewalls that automatically raise based on the temperature. And then also, if you don't want, to invest in something like that, farmers can just roll up the sides themselves. It's really about, what you end up needing, and sort of, don't buy what you don't have to. And then another thing he shared, which I thought was really interesting, was just that there's always, planning ahead, right? Planting 1 or 2 crops ahead. You can always be harvesting something out of there and then making some room for the next crop to go in. So really you can just keep that production going. And he talked a lot about his farm is about an hour outside of Atlanta, and arugula is very popular at the markets he goes to in Atlanta. So he's able to stay in those markets later than other farmers in the area that aren't using these structures. So that really gives an edge in terms of being able to sell that crop at a premium price point, for example, and make the most money possible. So now that I've given an overview about what high tunnels are, why people use them, they've increased in adoption over time, I want to dive into the methodology of the research activities conducted in that direct engagement work I mentioned that I did with high tunnel growers in the region. So the methodology for this work is known as a novel methodology developed by Dr. Mickey Swisher. It's called stakeholder-driven adaptive research. And basically the idea is that farmers and other agricultural service providers, so that could be crop consultants, it could be representative from seed companies, folks from NRCS or USDA. And basically the idea is that they're brought into the process of along the way of the project, so they can see basically the where the experiments are at. And we can ask them, what we're doing, does it make sense? Should we be doing something we're not doing? Are we wasting our time doing something that isn't useful? So basically the idea is to try to close that time lag between the discovery of a good practice for high tunnels in the South, for example, and then the adoption of that by growers. So the idea is basically bringing in growers and agricultural service providers in that iterative process over time is basically just going to make the information that we can get better, and it's going to make those solutions better, and hopefully innovation will happen faster. So basically, we had an advisory panel of folks on the project that met annually. These meetings would start with a presentation of research findings to date from all the researchers on the team, and then an interactive Q&A period. And then ultimately, the panel members would provide their expert recommendations for data collection procedures, future research efforts, anything like that in that discussion. So I wanted to just walk through, just because this is a little amorphous, I wanted to walk through like an example of one of the ways that the advisory panel on this project contributed meaningfully to our research activities. So this is a form, an assessment form that we used for the research assessments. If you remember that picture from earlier of those farmers looking at the pak choi, we also did this with tomatoes. So this was our very first form that was developed. And so the idea is that folks will go through all the plots in their assigned block, and they would use this form to write down their observations per plot. And then after, we would lead them in a facilitated discussion about their observations. So this was what we had developed originally. And then, we got a lot of feedback during the assessments that, what does this mean? Or, that maybe some of these options weren't really that descriptive. So we really worked through improving this form to, get some better information. So this was how it ended up. We took out weediness entirely because no matter what, they would always weed in the high tunnel. So they never saw weeds. So we took that off. We started to get really specific about the kinds of damage they were seeing to the specific parts of the plants. And then also really just making sure that we're defining what plant vigor characteristics are that we want people to look at and those fruit characteristics. So, that was just one of the ways that we really improved the work that we were doing as we were doing it with the help of the advisory panel. So ultimately, like, the nature of the discussion varied a lot in the 3 different advisory panel meetings held for the every year of the project. Although there were some consistently named areas of focus for future research. So that's what you're seeing here. Pest and disease management was a common theme expressed. This makes a lot of sense because of the hotter climate in the South, really lends itself to a lot more pest and disease pressure than maybe, the resources that are out there about high tunnels, especially because in an enclosed structure, you're sort of keeping the pests and diseases in one place. So it can get really, really bad over time. So that's something people really wanted research on. Also, the panel members expressed interest in more research about temperature control during the hot periods. Also makes sense. It's hot outside, and then it's even hotter inside that high tunnel. Crop rotation, including the type of crop and the timing, was another focus area repeated in all of the meetings. And then finally, nutrient management, of course, remained an important area of discussion throughout. What rates to fertilize at, what kinds of compost to use, how much and when. So these are really the critical areas of focus that were named by the advisory panel, looking at organic high tunnel production systems in the South. So the other outreach activity that we did were research assessments. So I mentioned these earlier. This involved basically 2 stages. The first is field observations. These begin with participants being assigned to blocks within the high tunnel. For the tomatoes, each block had 16 plants each. The participants walk through the plots in their assigned block. They use that form I just shared to record their observations. And they're actually blind to what treatment each plot received. So they know, what kinds of fertilizer, some of them had a cover crop. They know what their treatments were, but they don't know what plot got what treatment. And so then after that, the participants are led through a facilitated group discussion. They vote on what plots they thought looked best and which ones they thought looked the worst. And then the treatments for those best and worst are revealed. Well, they're all revealed. And then ultimately the participants reach consensus regarding what treatments to keep, which ones to eliminate, and what to add. And then we also ask, hey, should we be collecting any additional data? And ultimately, the objective is for growers to provide recommendations for changing treatments in current research and also to shape future research projects. So this is the plot key. So all of the numbers in the block, like the number 1 and over here, number 1 over here, these plots all got the same treatment. So basically this is the map that people get, and you say, hey, you're in block 1. And then that participant goes to block 1, they know where they are. It's all color coded in real life too. And then they walk through and make their observations. So this table shows the treatment details of the nutrient management experiment. This is a pretty classic ag experiment, a randomized complete block design. There's 6 blocks total. 3 blocks had a cover crop, the other 3 didn't. And then, like I said, within each block, there are 16 plots of tomato plants. Half of the plots in each block were grafted. I'll go into a little bit more about what that is in a moment here. Half the plots had a granular fertilizer and the other half had liquid fertigation. And then there were some different compost treatments you can see here. There's a star there because compost wasn't actually applied in this particular trial. So these are the residual rates from the pak choi that was in the high tunnel before the tomatoes were planted. So this is grafting. Basically, the idea is you take a rootstock from a tomato cultivar that, let's say, has a good disease resistance, which is a very attractive trait for a grower in Florida. And then you take the top of a seedling for a tomato plant that, say, is really delicious, right? So you want that delicious tomato, but you want it to be disease resistant. So you sort of Frankenstein them together. There's different techniques here, but basically this is Shufeng doing like an angle, like a slice at an angle, and then clipping the other tomato plant on that rootstock with a clip. So just to put it out there, this is a really labor intensive. So it's not something growers necessarily, especially small acreage farmers, they don't necessarily have the time to be doing this. I have heard that farmers do, they sometimes purchase already grafted seedlings as a way to save some time. So this table shows the voting outcome for the highest performing plots. Those are in blue, and then the lowest performing plots are in orange. So as you can see here, really the only clear split in terms of how participants assess performance was grafting. So there wasn't really as much of a clear split in terms of the fertilizer or compost treatments. So there's also a lot of factors that participants identified as the most important when considering plot performance. There was a lot of discussion about a preference leaning towards canopy size versus fruit load. And ultimately participants decided that, ideally an optimal balance between the amount of foliage and the amount of fruit is ideal. These are some photos taken from the tomato trial that was done by Dr. Tim Coulong at UGA. These were a series of heirloom tomatoes in a high tunnel there. So you can see some sort of more details of the canopy and then kind of what the fruit looked like right after it was harvested. So in terms of recommendations, this is what participants generated from that discussion. They agreed to keep all of the current treatments that we were doing and eliminate nothing. They also really wanted to compare the crop performance of purchased fertilizers with homemade fertilizers. They wanted to know more about the effects of grafting, exploring different rootstock varieties for grafting, and how the treatments were affecting soil pH over time. Also, they wanted us to collect additional data. A big thing that came out, not just with the tomato assessment, with the pak choi as well, were some temperature differences at the edge of the tunnel where those automatic sidewalls start to come up when the temperature goes up. There was a lot of plants at the edge of the tunnel that was getting a lot more sun than the ones sort of in the middle of those 3 bays. Also, folks really wanted us to kind of establish a suitable rootstock for Florida. And then also having all participants evaluate the same block, which is a great idea. So shifting gears now, I'm going to share some of the water resource management work that I did as part of my dissertation. This is a map I made showing acres of irrigated land by county in quantiles from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. So basically for this work, we were trying to get a sense of what the water resource management needs of growers were, and the ones that basically were using the most water. So I use this information, these acres of irrigated land, to base the sampling frame that I use to distribute the survey. So basically, I picked the top 10 counties in each of these southern region states to focus on. North Carolina was a little bit of a special case because a lot of the water use is for hog production along the coastal plain. So I did have to get some advice from some folks up there at those universities so I could get crop production growers. I wasn't focusing on animal productions. So North Carolina was a little bit different. So for this, I distributed a needs assessment questionnaire in 2020. This asked some producer demographics, some basic attributes about their farm, and then we wanted to know some insights about water resource management. So this was a sample of just crop production growers. This could be row and specialty crops. The final sample included 110 crop production growers from the whole region and 26 respondents from the US Virgin Islands specifically. So also my sampling frame had to be a little bit different for the Virgin Islands. There wasn't that same county data about irrigation. So I worked with University of Virgin Islands. They put me in touch with the Department of Ag there. That was nice enough to share a list of all of the registered farmers on the islands. And then I basically randomly chose the first 100 to distribute the survey to. Unfortunately, the distribution of the questionnaire was at the height of COVID. There was a lot of unforeseen circumstances presented by that, of course. So ultimately, the sampling protocol wasn't exactly possible to carry out as originally planned. There's not a representative sample whatsoever. But I think the preliminary data collected is interesting and offers a nice foundation for some further investigation. So I didn't report on the USVI data with the rest of the conterminous US because that sampling protocol was different. So they're not exactly viable comparison groups, but there were some really key distinctions between these groups. So in the Virgin Islands, most of the respondents were Black women, 35 to 49 years old, that hadn't been farming for very long, less than 20 years. Mostly folks were using organic practices. They weren't certified organic, but they were using organic practices, and these were family owned. They use predominantly rainfall for their water source and drip irrigation predominantly, and they're raising vegetables and fruit. You know, these scales are very different. An average farm in the Virgin Islands is about an acre. And in terms of what was really important for water resource management, the cost of irrigating now and declining water supply in the future were the big concerns for the Virgin Islands. In terms of water quality, they were concerned about biological threats and sedimentation, and they wanted increasing efficiency of irrigation to be the future direction of research. That was true for the conterminous US too. But this sample was really different. We're talking mostly white men, also 35 to 49 years old, who had been farming longer, a lot of them more than 20 years. These are conventional, also family owned, but most of the respondents had leased land. Groundwater was overwhelmingly the type of the source of water use, and then center pivot, which you can see pictured here, And then these farmers were doing, agronomic crops, corn, soybeans, cotton. That was mostly what they were growing. They were more concerned about regulations coming down in the future, affecting the amount of water that they would be able to access, and also declining water supply. And there was more concern about industrial pollutants for that group as well. So ultimately, improved efficiency is directly linked to climate, and basically establishing a set of high tunnel best practices for the southern U.S. Is really critical, especially as these high tunnels are gaining in popularity. There's a lot of long-term considerations that we just don't know yet. I mentioned pest and disease pressure over time earlier. That's a big one. Also, economic investment over time. Making sure that farmers are able to meet their bottom line, and this is actually a sound investment. In terms of water resource management, it's really important to know what folks are concerned about and how that varies by different areas. And also, there's an incredible amount of variance by geography in terms of climate. So that's really affecting things like planting date and how you're going to manage a high tunnel system. And then, of course, there's probably just unlimited amount of decision-making variance by farm, from farm to farm. So this iterative process that we employed is very labor intensive, but it gets the most robust information. It really helps in terms of getting the kind of information that farmers want to get out of research. And so with that, I'd like to let people ask questions. Thank you.
I don't think we have any from the room. In the chat.
Well, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, if you think of something later, please feel free to reach out to me by email. That's my email there on the screen. That QR code will give you like a business card of mine also.
Cool. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
If you guys are for you guys in the room, and I guess online too, don't forget to check in with the iClicker thing. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks,
Thank
Megan.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Sam. Bye, guys.
See ya.